One of the things that you may have to deal with is creating user accounts in Active Directory. Although most of the times user accounts are synchronized from on-premise Active Directory, just like these accounts did, there may be situations where you have to create your own account using the new user option. On the extreme right hand side, you see a column called as source, and then you see that these values are different from each other. Anywhere where you see Windows Server AD, it means that they are synchronized from on-premise Active Directory. The ones that says Azure Active Directory, they are created locally on your Azure AD directly. And that means that they are the native cloud identities. Windows Server AD means they are directory synchronized identities. What you can also do is create a guest account here. So there's a new guest user where you can invite somebody holding a third party account, maybe your consultant who belongs to a third party company, or maybe has a Google email address or a Microsoft email address. All you got to do is fill up the name, email address, first name, last name, and just click on invite. And they will then get an email. They got to accept it, and they will be available as a guest user in your Azure Active Directory. Now, what's more important to understand is how do you create a new user? Well, there are multiple ways. You may want to go and click on this new user option, select the create user, and then start doing that. But what do you do if you gotta create users in bulk? That is where PowerShell comes into our rescue. In this lesson, we can learn how you can use PowerShell to manage user objects, create groups, add user to the groups, and various things that you can use PowerShell for. Let's get started. So first thing that I'm going to do is launch PowerShell using this little icon here and then make enough space for myself so that we can see the view better. All right, so let this run, request for a Cloud Shell, and then we'll take a minute to authenticate, connect to the cloud storage, and all the wonderful things that it does in the backend. So I'm going to wait for a minute and then get started with creating users and groups. There you go, that is ready. So the first thing that I'm going to do is store my password somewhere because when I'm creating a user account, that user account must also have a password. So I will be using a variable called as dollar password equals and then use a PowerShell commandlet called as convert to a secure string because I really don't want to store my password as plain text. I would like to store that in a secure format. So I will use convert to hyphen secure string, use tab completion to complete it. And then I will pass a syntax here called hyphen string and put my password inside this, right? I will use some random password, something like this, RAINING, raining cloud, 12345 exclamation. I think that's long enough. All right, I replaced I with once there. So RA1 and 1NG. So, okay, looks like that's secure. So I'm gonna use another syntax here called as plain text and maybe use hyphen force. So there you go. So my password will not be visible to anybody here. So when I go ahead and try to see what's inside my dollar password, Azure would tell me that, hey, it's a secure string. You cannot just get into it and see that. So that's good. Now it's time to create an Azure account with a new hyphen Azure AD user commandlet. Okay. And then I'm going to give a display name to my user, call it as hyphen display name, and then put my display name inside the double quotes. Let's say my display name for the user is Marianne. So Marianne is a username. All right. And then I will use the hyphen user principal name syntax for that and then give a user principal name for that in double quotes and call it as Mary dot and at domain.com. Right now, what is your domain name? Well, you need to have a verified domain name in Azure Active Directory. So your verified domain name is of course this one is there by default. Keep Learning Cloud, whatever your email address is, without any special characters. .onmicrosoft.com is your default directory. But then If you have verified any domains under custom domains, they would then also be available for you. So when creating a user account, you can use the verified domain name as a suffix for all user principal names here. It's the same case when you're creating a user account with the user interface, the concept still remains the same. So when you create a user, you can type, let's say, Marianne at, in the drop down menu, you will have your verified domains. And this verified domain would also be acceptable from the CLI. All right, so I will go with the verified domain, say Marianne at raining cloud, rainingcloud.de. All right, so that's my user principal name. And now let's also pass the password variable which we have inside our variable called as password. Okay, you can pass as many variables as you want to this, so as many syntaxes. Let's pass another one called as mail nickname, and I'm gonna call the nickname as, let's say, Mary Ann or something. That's fine, and that should be enough. You can pass telephone numbers, fax numbers, manager attribute, etc. to this, but then this should be enough to create a user account. I'm gonna hit enter and see what happens. Okay, I got an error there because I got spaces in the mail nickname, and then I have corrected that here without any spaces. So I've got the user account created here, and then I'm able to say that user account is ready for me. Now, you can also create users in bulk here by importing a CSV and using that CSV to create user accounts. Just like the way we created a user account, let's go ahead and create a group, and then we will add this user to the group, but with PowerShell. So the commandlet to create a new group will be new hyphen Azure AD group, and I'm going to use tab completion for this. And then I'm going to hit enter, and what you'll notice is that you will see various attributes called display name, etc. Anything that is prompted for you, for example, display name is a prompted attribute for you, it is a mandatory attribute. That means you cannot get away from this. In case of a new Azure AD user, the mandatory attributes are user principal names and passwords. A mail nickname, manager attribute, telephone attribute, now these are not mandatory attributes. So I'm going to type the display name as, let's say, sales underscore folder underscore access. All right, hit enter. There you go. Then there's got a mail nickname, and I'm going to just type sales here to save time. Hit enter, and then my new group is created. You can of course do get hyphen Azure AD group to see if the group actually exists. There you go. Now this is all crumpled format, so I'm going to format it better. So get hyphen Azure AD group, and then I'm gonna pipe it something like this, and then say select, hey, show me all the names. Hit enter. All right, so there's a typo here. I've typed equals accidentally. It should be a hyphen. Well, it's not name, it is something called as a display name, so that's why I got an error. So let me just correct it. Display name. Hit enter. Now you should be able to see all the groups in Azure Active Directory, including the one that we just created. Okay, so the one that we just created is sales underscore folder underscore access. All right, there's a typo again here. It should be ACCESS, but it doesn't matter. So what we got to do is now add the user called as Mary Ann into this folder using PowerShell. So let's go get started by using PowerShell to add this user to that group. I'll clear the screen first, and then use this commandlet called as add hyphen Azure AD group member. I just did a tab completion. The next thing that I gotta do is use another syntax called as member object ID. So I'm gonna use hyphen member object ID, and then I need to find the object ID of the member. My intention was to make Marianne as the member. So what is the object ID of Marianne? I can find that out by going to Marianne's profile in Azure Active Directory, and then there is something called as an object ID right here. So I gotta copy and paste this right here. Now You may be thinking, is there a way I can get the object ID programmatically using PowerShell? Well, yes, let's go do that actually. So I'm going to do a Control C here and then get the attributes of Marianne. Just say get hyphen Azure AD user and then do a tab completion, and then I'm going to type hyphen user principal name, and the user principal name of Mary Ann is mary.ann at rainingcloud.de. All right. So what you see in the ID column is an attribute that starts with the number 380883 whatever. So that is the object ID. You can go ahead and compare it with what you see in the graphical user interface. Click on the user, and then that's what it is, exact same number. So when I run add-azure AD group member as the commandlet, I'm going to pass that value as an input. Let's see how to do that. So I'm going to say add-azure AD group member. All right. And then my member object ID is what I see here. Okay. So I'm going to right click and copy this and then paste right here. So this user that has the member object ID will be added to my target group. So my target group object ID. What is my target group object ID? Okay, so I need to go and find out what the group object ID is. Well, you could have just gone and done get hyphen Azure AD group and then you type the group name. It's going to give you the group object ID. But then I don't want to miss or mess up this construct. So I will minimize this guy, go to my groups, and then identify the group from there. All right. So there's my object ID. I'm going to copy this from the UI and then paste it right here. But when you are doing the labs, make sure that you have the user's object ID and the group object ID beforehand and try to get it from PowerShell. You know how to do that. Just say get-azure AD user for the user, and for the group you will do get-azure AD group, like get-az AD group. Okay, I'm not gonna paste this, all right, and hit enter and see what happens. There you go. Looks like there's no error. There's no red painting on the screen. So I'm gonna minimize this guy and try to see if there is Mary inside this group. I'll click on this group here. Okay, it does not respond, so I'll refresh it and then click on it now. It works. Then click on members. I should see Mary inside that. I don't see it. That's not a problem. It's just a refresh issue. Click on refresh and it still does not work. Go back to the home page, groups, and then find the group. Sometimes it's just a refresh issue, so don't worry about it. If you got no error, then it should be part of it. Okay, like I said, it's a refresh issue, so Marianne is programmatically using PowerShell added to the following group. Now you can also do that for bulk users and bulk group modifications. So what I wanted to show you is that everything that is doable using the user interface, for example, basic things like creating a new user, inviting a guest account, resetting the passwords, adding user to the groups, changing the properties, modifying the attributes of a user, for example, adding the job information, department, manager, all of this can be added using PowerShell. When you're running through the labs, please go ahead and see how you can use the full potential of every commandlet. Spend some time. So the best way to do is using the help available in every commandlet. So let's say you want to get the help information for the get-azure AD user. You're going to type that and then type examples next to it, and then you're going to see how you can use get-azure AD user and the possible ways and possible examples as well as to how you can use the commandlet here. Now this help is available for every commandlet in PowerShell. In this lesson we learned that we can not only manage user objects using the user interface but also using PowerShell, and for demonstration purposes we created user accounts, a group, and added user to the group.